So I'll kick us off. So I'll introduce myself first. So I'm Matt. I'm on the AWS Amplify team. So I lead all of our sort of open source programs and initiatives. I've been on the team for about 2.5 years. And prior to AWS, I've been more or less in the developer relations space for like the last 8 years. So it's really cool for me to be able to focus on open source and work with folks like Max.
Hey folks, my name is Max. I'm the head of growth at MLH. My background's really been in the edtech industry and in tech strategy. And unlike AWS, I feel like I should take a moment just to introduce MLH. So MLH is Major League Hacking. We are the largest organization for student developers and early career technologists in the world. And we run a whole host of different types of programming and events to help people launch their careers in tech. So without further ado, I just want to tell you what we're here to talk about, right? So as Matt said, we're here to talk about the work that we've done together between the MLH Fellowship Program and the AWS Amplify team to seed and to grow the Amplify community. What we want you to come away from this talk knowing is a bit about a framework to think about growing your open source community, some tools and techniques to establish the foundations that you need to do that, and how the MLH Fellowship can help accelerate and grow your community, and a whole host of other benefits that sponsors get from the program. So what to expect here in the next 45 minutes. Matt's going to talk a bit about Amplify, how he and the team think about success in open source, the growth challenge, which I think everyone here who's involved in open source will know a little about, the MLH Fellowship, and some of the outcomes of what we've done together. We're going to try and cover that in about 30 minutes and keep 15 minutes or so for Q&A, because we'd love to hear if any of you have similar challenges or different solutions. All right.
Cool. So let's dive into Amplify. So I think I was just curious to start off and ask how many here have heard of Amplify or maybe used Amplify? So it seems like one or two of you have. So let me start and just kind of get everyone on the same page. So essentially, we've heard feedback from front-end developers that AWS can kind of be overwhelming, which I think is really fair. There's hundreds of services, and even just sort of logging in and looking at all the services like to choose from can be a bit intimidating. So the idea with Amplify is to make it really simple for front-end developers to use AWS. So for one, we have a framework which essentially has abstracted these different like categories. So we have one for authentication and storage, for example, and you don't really need to think about the underlying services like Cognito or S3, for example. So one part of it is those libraries. The second part is the CLI, and that makes it really easy for you to provision those services. So it's a tool chain where you can run a command like amplify add auth, for example, and you don't have to go into the console, and we'll sort of in a very CLI-friendly way ask you a set of questions about how you want to authenticate your users. Like, do you want to use their email address or phone number, for example? Amplify is also a hosting service, so it makes it really easy for you to host your single page app. So really easily like anytime you merge a commit into GitHub, you can auto build. So it's a lot easier than just sort of saving your single page app to S3 with CloudFront. And then the fourth thing that you might have heard about is Amplify Studio, which is about a year old now. And it's a tool to essentially merge your Figma code into like React components. So it's a Figma to code tool. But for today's talk, I want to mostly focus on Amplify framework. So that's really the open source side to AWS Amplify. So we have several libraries across sort of all the popular like JavaScript frameworks. So as you'd expect, like Next.js and Vue and Angular. And then we also have native libraries in iOS and Android. So in terms of our sort of open source journey, I wanted to talk about sort of the why, like why has Amplify decided to build these libraries in the open, and sort of what does it give us that's fundamentally different than a lot of AWS services that are closed source. So the first point I really want to talk about is sort of stemming from community. So I think building out in the open has given us a very strong community because we're working, alongside our developers, and we're working alongside our customers. And it has made it really easy to sort of show them like where we're heading, and it's made it really easy to get feedback, for example. So just for one, just building out in the open has allowed us to earn trust from the community and have a really strong community in general. But sort of like, what are the other advantages to working in the open? So to start off, I've seen the ability just to get feedback a lot sooner has been really apparent. So if we post a request for comments on GitHub or an RFC, it's really easy for us to sort of instantly start to be able to talk to the community and hear how they would like this feature to be built. And I think if you sort of compare us to some of the other services, it's just harder for them to sort of activate their community and hear from their community directly. So that's definitely one. The second thing is really being able to close feature requests faster. So I've seen customers who maybe would have liked to see a feature slightly tweaked or add an additional integration, and they're able to unblock themselves, right? So they can create a GitHub issue and even submit a pull request that sort of solves their pain point. And that's something that's also pretty unique to open source. And then it looks like the other aspects I put here is really being able to work with developers all around the globe. So traditionally, maybe AWS teams are mostly focused in Seattle, but for Amplify, we have folks across the country, and we just get all sorts of thought leadership and different perspectives that are pretty unique. And then sort of stemming from my point around community, we can allow developers to empower each other. So they'll create blog posts or sort of share tips. And because it's all public, I think developers are more inclined to create that content on open source communities because they can kind of see exactly how these things are working and really feel like they understand kind of what's going on under the hood. And then lastly, it's definitely helped our recruiting efforts. So we'll talk about that with the fellowship a bit, but we've definitely worked with contributors and tried to refer them as interns or even join full time. So that's been pretty cool to see. So if you in the room sort of have your own open source project or just trying to wonder how can you get started, I essentially just kind of wanted to outline here what are the things that you really need to build a successful open source project and make it appealing to contributors. So the first bullet here is really around kind of the obvious sort of table stakes that you would hope to see in all open source projects. So you need some sort of README and contributor file that really just lets your developers know what this project is, how they can get involved, and what to expect. And then after that, I've seen sort of these issue templates become really helpful, right? So essentially, folks who will create issues are now being able to get asked a set of questions. You can ask them what version are you using or what Amplify services, and it really makes the triaging process a lot easier, especially if you're receiving hundreds of issues. It sort of standardizes how you intake all those different issues. So that's definitely really helpful. It's also really important to sort of label all your good first issues, right? So this makes it a lot more accessible and kind of less overwhelming for someone who's just coming to your project for the first time. So we definitely try on all of our libraries to make it really clear what's sort of a good starting point. I think it can be frustrating for folks who are spending their weekend or time after work and start working on an issue that's actually quite complicated. And then it sort of takes a lot longer for us to work with them to close because it just sort of requires a lot more knowledge. And if you haven't really spent a lot of time with our code base, I think it could be a bit more difficult. So I think the good first issues are really helpful. And then I think what's also important, especially at maybe a larger organization like AWS, but really ensuring that you have buy-in internally, right? So ensuring that the teams are ready to actually review these pull requests and are able to answer issues. It's really frustrating if you have a repo. It's kind of actually a bad sign if you have sort of hundreds of pull requests that are just sitting there. It's really not that encouraging, right? So it's really important that you have buy-in and you have a process to respond to people maybe after 2 or 3 days, for example. And then I think it's also important to really ensure you have a good support system. So where can developers get help? Do you have a Discord server maybe where developers can come in and ask questions? So I'll talk a little bit about our Discord server in a few slides from now. But yeah, so essentially these are all the sort of starting points, all the foundations that you really need to have a successful project. And then from there, it's really about growth. So I put together this flywheel in terms of how Amplify at least thinks about their open source vision and really, how can you grow this community? So I'll kind of just walk everyone through it first. So kind of naturally, if you put together an open source project and you have, somewhat of a following, right? Folks will start using your code base and they'll just naturally create issues, and they might create a feature request, or they might even submit a pull request. So after you sort of have those start to bubble up, you might start to see some contributors come to your project, because then it kind of excites folks, like there's work that needs to be done here. And ideally, those contributors are pushing the project forward, so they're submitting pull requests, or maybe they're trying to reproduce bugs, for example, and ultimately that should create a better developer experience. So it should make the project a lot smoother, it should push it forward. So that's sort of the idea with the flywheel. I think on the previous slide, I really talked about how you can get to the first part, which is how can you ensure you get those issues and those pull requests, for example. But what's really been a challenge for Amplify, at least at the start, was really getting to the second part of the flywheel. So, we had a lot of issues, we had some pull requests, but how do we really add a lot of fuel and really grow? And that can just take time, and it's something that has been really helpful for the MLH Fellowship that has really helped just sort of fuel that growth. So I know Max is going to spend a lot of time really talking about how the fellowship can help you sort of close that loop. But I did want to talk about some other methods to sort of get more contributors excited and really just build up your contributor community. So some other things that we did, and I think this is probably another sort of table stakes objective, but to have some sort of home or place for your contributor program. So for us, it was really simple. We just sort of put together this website, contribute to AWS.com, and we just laid out everything that a developer would need to know who wants to contribute. So we sort of have a getting started guide, we have a YouTube video that shows you how to clone the repo and how to set it up locally. We also have pulled in all those good first issues, and then we have links to like our Discord, for example. So this has been a really sort of critical component, I think, to just make it friendly and appealing to contributors. And then sort of the other things we were thinking about are sort of open source advocacy. So I think that really means going to conferences like this, having these conversations, writing blogs that really show the success of different contributors and what they've built and sort of why they wanted to contribute. So really to like amplify those voices is pretty important. I just talked about the contributor program, and then our Discord server has been really interesting. So we were the first AWS service to have a Discord server, and the idea there was how can we bring sort of the developers who are using Amplify and the contributors all in one spot and in real time. I think that's the key sort of point there, is the real timeness of Discord, and just unblock people. So if someone wants to start with a PR, for example, they can bring it to our office hours, which we run every Thursday for an hour. So we sort of introduced that concept, and that has made it really easy for us to be able to work with contributors directly. So I definitely recommend starting a Discord if you have an open source project, and you can just link to that in your README. And then the last thing has been the fellowship. So the fellowship, for us, we were at this point where I had been on the team for about 6 months. We had like over 650 GitHub issues, and we did have some PRs, but I was really looking for a way in which we could really grow and just accelerate that. So I think it's a good time to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Matt. So before I dive into the fellowship, I just want to go like up a level and out a level and just talk a little bit more about MLH. So MLH's mission is to empower early career technologists. What we really aim to do is to provide the skills and experience that people need to launch their careers in tech, and specifically the skills and experience that people aren't getting in the classroom. I come from a computer science background, and I learned an awful lot of stuff at school. Not all of it was what I needed to start out as a software engineer in industry, and there were certainly things that I needed to know that I did not get from my schooling. So really that is what we're all about. And it's not just people from universities and a computer science program, it's people who are anywhere out there learning to code, who want to get started, going from an individual developer to a professional software engineer. So the MLH Fellowship is a 12-week educational program aimed at getting the best and brightest people from our community into open source. At a high level, we connect talented, emerging developers with open source projects like AWS Amplify, and provide them the training, the management, and the facilitation that they need to make really meaningful contributions to those projects. So MLH community, I've mentioned this a couple of times. What does that look like? It's about 150,000 active members. So every year we have over 150,000 early career technologists. And by the way, some early career technologists are people who are quite late in life and going through a career change. That's how many people we have coming to our events. That's our reach. It's about a third of US computer science majors. And the program, the community is extraordinarily diverse. We have about 2.5 times the representation from underrepresented groups in tech in our community as you would have in a typical computer science classroom. So we've got this huge pool of talent, and they're all very engaged with our brand and our activities and what we do. And what we want to do is help companies use that to get in front of our community members and to bring them in and launch their careers in tech. So historically, MLH has run thousands of hackathons, workshops, events, and meetups all around the world, in person and remote. In that case, it's all about people getting their start in tech, meeting like-minded people, and building awesome stuff, maybe launching their first website, using an API for the first time. In the past few years, we've really wanted to think about taking that further and getting the top talent that come through our community and who are winning hackathons and building really awesome projects and really launching their careers in tech. We found that people were coming to our community wanting to build their portfolio, build their networks, and navigate the world of work. So that's exactly what we've tried to do with our fellowship program. So how does that fit in with open source? We couldn't imagine doing this without open source. First of all, the open source community is really passionate. That's why we're all here. The open source community wants to seed the next generation of developers, of engineers, of contributors and maintainers. People like Matt and his team want to go out and mentor people and get a lot out of that. So there's a huge amount of passion in open source, and I'll talk a little bit more later on about some of the magic and value of using open source as a platform to train and onboard people who are early in their career. And the last thing is the project communities. I think Matt talked quite a lot about typical kind of ambition and need in an open source project, which is to bring the community in, understand more about how people are using the platform, the pain points they have when they're getting started. Crowdsourcing those issues and things that people want built, bugs that they're finding, new features that they want, all the way through to contributors who are actually building it, all the way through to potentially hiring those people. Long have people found senior experienced talent in the open source world, connected with them, and ended up hiring them. So how does it work? We identify the best and brightest emerging talent from the MLH community. We match them with projects that are aligned with their interest areas and their skill sets. So for Amplify, that's people who are interested in the cloud and have strong background in JavaScript, right? We then go into onboarding them, getting them started, right? Providing them the training that they need to be able to write a good PR, to navigate GitHub, to work in an engineering team for the first time, to understand and navigate an enterprise code base. And then throughout the program, throughout the 12 weeks, we provide the kind of the technical mentorship and management that people need to facilitate them throughout their time. A lot of how we built the program comes from some of the challenges that we've seen in other open source contribution programs. So we really focus on vetting the people who get into the program, making sure they've got the right motivation, the right skill set, the right aptitude to really work with professional engineers and start their careers. We draw from our communities, those people who know us and understand us and what we do. And then we focus really heavily on making it a good experience for maintainers as well as contributors. And I think that's something that's not been thought about and focused enough on. How do we make these contribution programs great experiences for people like Matt so that it's not killing them to do it and they come back time and time again and want to keep doing it. So with that, I'll get into a little bit about what makes the program special. So there's a huge mutual value to working on open source projects. As an early career technologist, as a student, you get a public portfolio for your work. You get to take that with you. If you intern in a closed source company, often you can't even talk about what programming language you use there, let alone being able to link a GitHub repository in your resume. And then on the other side, for projects, it's easy onboarding. there's no email address to set up, no laptop to ship, no HR, no payroll, nothing like that to get set up. People do get paid for taking part in the program, I hasten to add, but we look after that on our side. And lastly, there's all of the community growth that comes with it. Diversity and inclusion. So the MLH community is extraordinarily diverse. So by working with MLH, you are explicitly engaging, supporting underrepresented groups in tech, which I think is a win for everyone. Organizations broaden their reach, not just globally, not just across the borders of their company and across national borders, but a huge range of schools. We've got 5,000 universities in our network, and a range of backgrounds way beyond university as well, from boot camps to self-taught to career changes. And last of all, the program's multi-tenanted. So it's a little bit like the public cloud, but for an early career training program. So we do the heavy lifting so that Matt and his team can really focus on the high value interactions, the actual mentoring, and engaging with people on the domain knowledge in which they're experts. I feel like that's definitely enough from me about the fellowship program. I want to hand over to a few participants who actually worked on the Amplify project over the last few months.
See if the sound works.
Let's try and play a video.
I was definitely not new to open source before getting into MLH fellowship. I had already contributed in some small scale project. I got an opportunity to work on a real-time project, the project on which many companies depend upon.
I have to give a big shout out to the Amplify team because I stumbled a lot, but they were so patient, and that kind of gave me the room and the comfort level to get back up and try again and keep going, really.
I learned about how I was capable of writing those kind of level of code that can actually go into the production and be used at larger platforms.
My experience in MLH fellowship helped me to become a Linux Foundation mentee.
It's become much easier, you know how to do it, and you find a group of people who can just help you out with anything.
It's been a great launching experience. It's given me a very good insight into the skills that I need. I mean, it has given me certain skills, but it's also given me insight into some skills that I need to further develop to succeed as a software developer.
One which I think I am most proud of is reproducing the issues. It felt quite satisfactory, helping others to reproduce their issue and fix it. It was quite a great experience.
Well, after the fellowship, I got a job at Amazon again. That might not have been possible without the skill sets that I might have received. No, I definitely received through this MLH fellowship.
I was definitely not new to open source before getting into MLH fellowship. I had already contributed in some small scale project.
All right, so taking a step back up, what did Amplify get out of this? So the team came in really thinking about code contributions, right? How can we get some of the issues solved? How can we bring some new people in to contribute to the Amplify code base? But actually there's a huge amount of community growth that's been driven out of it as well. A talent pool that's been built up. People like Sushi getting hired into the AWS team as full-time employees off the back of the program. And an element of open source advocacy. You heard it there from some of the participants. They're excited to continue contributing to open source code. They've learned a lot and they've built a network. I think it's worth sharing, some of the numbers and some of the outcomes here. Matt, I don't know if you want to talk to some of this as well.
Yeah, I think to add for us, sort of as Max said, right? So I sort of had the standpoint of we have hundreds of these issues. How could we just sort of execute a bit faster? How could we sort of reproduce some of these bugs? Could we get some feature requests out? And that's sort of how the fellowship started for us. But then we started to get a lot of feedback, right? Hey, we didn't have the contributor site at that point. How come all these labels aren't uniform, for example? So I thought just being able to seed that and get a lot of feedback early was really helpful. And then it sort of just naturally became that flywheel, right? So then they started to create some content. They were really excited to share their 12-week experience. And then I wrote a blog that then went on the AWS open source blog, and that sort of created more advocacy and excitement. And then that was sort of how that flywheel started to take off. So for us, it definitely really helped. And now I think we're about 2 years into the program, and I see it as a much larger picture. It's not just about the code contributions, right? We get content. We even have folks who have now joined the team. So yeah.
Absolutely. Just to demystify some of these numbers, assuming not everyone works in marketing and open source. So number of fellowship alumni, that one should be pretty clear. That's the number of people we've run through recently. Merge PRs are pull requests on GitHub that have actually been merged into the production code base and are now part of the Amplify framework that people are using all around the world. NPS is Net Promoter Scores, right? So that's, did people have a good time? Would they recommend it to their friends and peers? And 100 is the best you can get. That's perfect. That's incredible. So the fact that all of the fellows had an incredible experience just means a huge amount to us, and it's real testimony to the hard work. Not just in the MLH team, the pod leaders and the program managers on our side, but actually the mentorship and the thought that went into scoping all of the projects on that and the Amplify team side. And last of all, the maintainer NPS, all of the people that are involved in the team as mentors and really as the end consumers of the code contributions, they were extremely happy as well. 90 NPS is an extraordinarily high score. You got anything else you want to add in terms of kind of outcomes and thoughts about where we've landed?
Yeah, I mean, for us too, it's also just about those stories. Like, we've reached folks in communities who wouldn't have had access to like the Amazon internship program. That's primarily for folks in the United States. So really just hearing a lot of the stories too around like, hey, we wouldn't have been able to work one-on-one like with an engineer. So we've paired our engineers internally like one-to-one with the fellows, and that has been really exciting. I know we've invited them to our stand-ups and things. So they really feel a part of the team. So I think it's just really empowering as well.
Awesome. Coming up on 30 minutes, we promised we'd wrap this up as quickly as we can. I think we've covered the story in some detail. I'm sure there are lots of questions around. Before we get into the Q&A, just wanted to pause and just give some signposting as to how you can get involved. So if you're a student, come along, apply for the fellowship. It's an awesome opportunity. It's like an internship, but it's in the open source. You get to work with a project that wants your skills, that wants to work with you and wants to mentor you. Your portfolio, your work's going to be public. This is an awesome thing for people who are just getting started in tech. If you're a maintainer, we're always looking for new projects to work with, new sponsors to come in and support the program. And if you're a company and you're using open source, we have open source projects yourself. Again, please come along, find out more about how we can power your talent pipeline, your community, your contributor base. And last of all, if you're an individual and you're interested in the program as well, say hi, chat to both of us, find out more about it. We've got some links here both to contribute to Amplify and to the MLH partnership page. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it.